All right, so in the last lesson, we learned how to incorporate Spring JPA into our project Spring Data JPA and to create a repository and load our test or sample data, our sample people records into that database using an application runner. And so we've got that data here now. So now I think it's time for us to do another part of the CRUD operation. So this data that we're showing here now, which is actually coming from the database, represents one variation of the read part of the CRUD, create, read, update, and delete functionality. But now let's go ahead and add the ability to actually create a person programmatically from the browser, okay? And so that would allow us to enter the information or the details about a person and then have that person added to the database and then refresh the page to show the newly added person, okay? So the first thing we're going to do is add a form to this same page so that we can actually enter the details of a person. And one way that I would probably start off with, similarly to how we started off with this table, is I would head back over to Bootstrap and find a good starting template for a form. So let's do that now. So let's see here. I will switch over to the bigger version of this that I have and go to the Bootstrap documentation. And right here, we've got forms, okay? So I'm going to click on forms and then go to the overview here. And I will scroll through a little bit. And basically, I'm just looking for some example form that looks like it might be a good starting point. And actually, I think this one here would probably be okay. I can scroll a little bit more really quickly and see if there's anything else that jumps out at me, and no, there isn't really. Let's see. Yeah, I'm just going to go for this one right here. So what I can do is just copy that, and then I will jump back over to the IDE and go back into our template file here. All right, so now I need to make my, oh, and I'm sorry, I just realized I'm not in presentation mode. So again, let me switch into presentation mode real quick here. There we go, nice and big for you to be able to see now. Okay, so this div here is enclosing this table, so I don't want anything inside of there. So I think what I'm going to do is put this new form right underneath the div for that table. Okay, does that make sense? So here's that table, here's the end of the table, and then here's the div that we were using to enclose that table. So then I'm going to go ahead and just paste this sample form right here for now, and let me open back up the smaller, this guy here, and then switch back over to the IDE also. All right, so now we've got all of that. So now let me just refresh or restart the application and see this sample form show up, hopefully. Okay, there it is. And so we've got that same issue now that the form itself by default wants to take up all of the space. Now, I could probably address this in a couple of ways, and let's just experiment a little bit here. So one thing I could do, maybe let's see what this form looks like if we actually put it inside of that same div. Okay, so right under the table, I will just paste that form there, and then let's restart and see. Okay, so yeah, maybe that's definitely better. That's for sure. Okay, okay, and maybe I'm also going to give just a little more room, just a little bit more room to be able to see what's going on here. It's not much more, but a little bit. Okay, so now what I think we're going to want to do though is to modify this table, obviously, to have all of the fields that we need, right? Like first name, last name, etc. And you know what? I knew I was forgetting a field. It was the email field. That's the field that I was forgetting in our domain model. So let's go ahead and add an email field while I'm thinking about it real quick. So I'm going to jump over to the person class, and I'm going to add email. It doesn't really matter where I put it, and that'll be a string. Okay, so we're going to add an email field here. Now that's going to have some repercussions for our data loading, right? So we've got that person data loader or people data loader. I can't remember what I called it. Let's see, data loader, person data loader. So now this is broken because we're using the all args constructor, which now will expect us to specify an email address also. And let me see here. If I put my cursor here and do a Command P to show all the parameters, so I need to put that email right before the decimals here, so the big decimals. So for now, maybe I'll just use the same email address for everybody, since this is really just kind of dummy data anyway. So I'm using a multi-cursor selection here to put multiple cursors all at the same time. And then I'm going to do a string, comma, and then I'm going to go back, scroll over a little bit, and I don't know, I'll just put dummy at sample.com for now. And then hit escape to get out of that mode. Okay, so now everybody has an email address again. And then let's go back over to the people.html file and let's add the email column or field to the table. So I just duplicated line 17, and then I'm going to add another header here called email. And then down here, I will duplicate line 27, and I will extract the email field, or the email data from the person and display that as well. And I think that should be all we need there. So now let's restart and see that new email field show up. There we go. Very good. So we got our email field now. Okay, cool. So now let's go down to the new form that we are beginning to customize. And I suppose we can let this one email field just remain just as it is, except that we'll probably move it in order, move it down a bit. But let's see here. So now the way we want to do this is that you've got a label and then you've got the actual input element here. Okay, so this label element here corresponds to this label right here. And then the input widget or field, you'll hear the term widget or control or field or text box or whatever. That corresponds to this blue box here, okay? So that's the input field. And then this particular field also has a little note added to it, and that is inside of this div here with this text right there, okay? So that's kind of an optional thing that you could choose to have, okay? So I'm just kind of giving you the layout of how the form kind of works, okay? And then all three of these things, the label, the control, the label, the text field, and then the little comment there are all grouped together inside of a div. And much the same way that I put my table inside of a div, these three elements are put inside of a div in part so that a margin can be defined on them, okay? So first thing I think we want to do is acknowledge that this label is meant to be the label for this input field, and that is actually coded in HTML with this attribute called for. So this value here will actually correspond to the ID of this input field. So you can have IDs associated with elements in HTML, and you can name them pretty much whatever you want, okay? And so here, they chose to name this field example input email 1. And so up here they're saying, here's a label for the example input email 1 field, okay? And that just helps HTML to know that this label corresponds to this input here. But we can name them whatever we want. So I'm going to rename this variable here on both the label for attribute and then the ID here. So I double clicked on that, and then I'm going to hold down on Option Shift, and I'm going to select this one too so that I can change them both at the same time. And I'm just going to call this email, like so. And then I think I will go ahead and just copy this whole entire div with everything in it. I'm going to copy that. And then I'm going to make a new line, and then I'm going to just paste a few copies of this for each of our fields that we want. So there's 1, 2, I don't know how many I need, but I'll do 3 for right now. And so this first one can be the first name, I suppose. So I'm going to, again, double click and select the email field, this email value here for the for attribute, and then this one here with an Option Shift or Alt Shift, I think, for Windows and Linux. And I will name this field first name, like so. And now I can also define the type of data that goes into this input field. And currently it is specifically set to be an email field. And what that means is that if I don't enter a valid email address, the browser itself can try to validate that for me a little bit. And it can even try to warn me that that's not a proper email field. Since this isn't meant to be an email field, though, I'm going to get rid of that and I'm going to replace it. Now, the IDE can actually give me recommendations here. So if I erase that email and then do a control space, it will tell me what are the various options that I have according to the standards of HTML. And the option that I'm going to want is simply text. Whoops, text. All right, so I want that to be a basic text field. And then I can change this bit over here. Now this has to do with helping people with disabilities. All right, so for now I'm just going to rename that to first name help, okay? And then I don't want this little blurb here, so I'm just going to delete that line, okay? And in fact, you know what, I probably should have just maybe used this as my template for the next few fields. So I'm going to select those next two, delete those, and then come back over here and then paste that. And so now this will be last name. So I'm going to select both of these, say last name, and change this to last name help. I'm not too worried about this value here because that's going to get replaced shortly. Let's see, what else do I have? First name, last name, date of birth. Okay, so first name, last name, then date of birth. So again, I will select all of that and then replace it with my other version of this, my copy of the first name field. And this one will be date of birth. So again, I will select that and change this to just DOB. Then I will change this to DOB help, like so. Now this, I can change the input type from text. Let's see what the other options are here. Control space. So I've got a date option right there. I also have a date time local. That would be date and time. We're not capturing time though in our domain model, so I probably wouldn't want that. And let's see, I think those are, and then there's a time only. I definitely would not want that. So I think I'm going to just choose the date option here. All right, so let's see, date. Oops, and I guess I accidentally overwrote the original email field. So let me jump back over. Let me jump back over here and I'm just going to grab that example again of just the email field, because that is the next field that I actually do want. All right, so I will paste that right here, except I do still want it to be called a little bit differently, email, okay? And then let me jump back over here, and then salary should be the last one. So then I will select this and this salary. And I guess I will change that though to some example. And now I don't want this to be a password input type. Let's see what my options are again. Let's see, do we have a currency or something like that? I don't see currency. So just number is as close as I'm probably going to be able to get for right now. Let's see, and then they've also got a checkbox. So we don't need that checkbox, so I'm going to get rid of that. And then the button here is currently called submit. And maybe we will just call this, I don't know, add person or save person. I don't know. Save person perhaps. And let's see how that's looking. So I'm going to restart. Okay, so there we are. Yeah, so we've got several fields. Oh, that little money thing there is looking weird, isn't it? Let's see, where was that? Oh, sorry, I wasn't thinking. That should just say salary. There we go. Oh, and then I need to change the labels of all of these too. Okay, so that's what that was for. Sorry, I wasn't looking at that correctly. So this should say first name. Maybe I want that to be capital N. And then this should be last name, date of birth. I don't think I'm going to spell it out. Then this is email, address, and then salary. Okay, let's refresh. There we go. First name, last name, date of birth, email address, and salary. And then save person. Okay, very good. All right, we're getting somewhere now. Okay, so that's just what it takes to just kind of create the basic scaffolding of the form. But now we need a way to make it so that when someone fills out these fields and then clicks this button, something useful actually happens. And obviously we want to collect all this data and get it into the back end, which is our Java code, so that we can process it into an actual instance of a person and then save that person into the database, right? That's the ultimate goal that we're striving for. So how do we do that? Well, we'll use a combination of additional Thymeleaf attributes embedded throughout this form, plus a little bit of extra code on the back end in our controller, okay? So we can start off with those attributes here. So maybe one of the first things we can do, starting from the top of this form, is we can specify a model object, an object that will live in the model that should be connected to the fields that we have here. Okay, so if you imagine that we took an object of type person and we put that object into our model from the model view controller pattern, we put that into the model, and let's imagine that this would be an empty person, so none of its fields would be filled in. Okay, it wouldn't be null. It would be an actual instance, but the first name, last name, all of those fields, the fields of this person instance would not be populated with anything, most likely. Okay, and then what would happen is that we can have Thymeleaf populate the values of this form with whatever fields are in that person instance, for one thing. And then when we submit this form back to the backend, all of those fields will be populated into an instance of a person. So if that doesn't make sense, hopefully it will in just a moment, okay? So the first thing we're going to do, though, is to connect this form to the fields of a person class instance, okay? And so the way we can do that is using a Thymeleaf attribute, th::object, okay? So we're going to connect this to an object. And then we can give it a name. So this would just be the name of an object that exists in the model. Okay, so I think a good sensible name would be person, like so. All right, now we'll want to actually connect each of these fields to a property of this person instance, okay? And the way we can do that is with another Thymeleaf attribute, which is th::field. And what we can do is use a little shorthand like this. Now let me explain what this means. Although it's probably mostly obvious, but let me explain what this asterisk means here. This asterisk means that we want to bind this input field to the first name field of this person object up here. So this star here, this asterisk, basically means the person object up here. Alternatively, another way you could think of it is that this is kind of like a shorthand for saying an alternative, which would be person dot first name, okay? So this person dot stuff here, we can drop that and just use an asterisk here, okay, to specify that we are binding to the first name field or the first name property of this person object. Really, we're saying bind to the first name field of whatever object we're dealing with up here, okay? That's what this asterisk means, all right? And then we can go ahead and just do the same thing for the other fields now. th::field equals star last name. th::field equals star DOB. TH field equals, oh, and I just realized I used the $sign. That's also a standard. That's another way of specifying things, but that won't work in this particular case. So I probably had a little force of habit there. All right, and this is going to be email, and then we need one for the salary also. TH field equals star email, whoops, salary, sorry. Okay, so we've got all of those. Now, let's see what happens if I just restart everything. Okay, so the program blows up. And the reason, well, let's actually go look at it and we'll see what it says here. So what we're seeing here is a stack trace that's actually showing up in the browser. And by the way, stack traces in browsers are usually a really bad thing. You really want to hide errors like this from showing up in the browser itself, because sometimes you could, well, first off, it's scary looking to your users. They don't know what that is, and it just looks really, really scary and bad. But also sometimes, depending on the type of application you're creating, you might have information in that stack trace that you don't want customers to see. There could be passwords and security related kinds of things that are accidentally showing up in this stack trace. So you really don't want stack traces to be able to be seen. We may take a look in this section at how to hide that, though I don't promise you that. Like I said, this is meant to be an introduction to Spring, not the whole entire Spring course, okay? But anyway, let's take a look at this stack trace real quick and see what it is saying. Let's see, so it's mentioning something about the people there. Oh, it's mentioning the template at line 48, which is right here. Line 48, column 68. And if I put my cursor over here, let's see. Now, because I'm in presentation mode, I'm not easily able to see what column I'm on, but I kind of already know what the issue is anyway. And let's see, if I scroll a little bit more, there we go. Let's see, neither binding result nor plain target object for being named person available as request attribute. Okay, so what it's basically complaining about is that we are referring to a bean called person, an instance called person, but it's basically saying there isn't one. And that makes sense because we haven't actually created one yet. Okay, so now let's go create one. And to do that, we need to jump into the controller, okay, the person controller class. All right, so this is actually going to be pretty easy to do. So now that you know how to put data into the model using a dedicated method that has a model attribute annotation, you will now know how to do the next thing we're about to do, which is to simply create another method that will return an instance of a person though. And for now, we'll just call this get person. I might rename that a little more meaningfully in a bit. And then we will return a new instance of a person. But this will be using the noarg default constructor, which means that we'll create a new person, but it will end up being a blank instance of a person. Okay, that's pretty much what we're doing there. All right, and then we're going to annotate this also with model attribute. Now, one thing that we're going to do a little differently from up here though is I'm not even going to specify a name or a key for this instance because I don't absolutely have to in this case. So what will happen is if I don't specify a name for this object that is about to be stored in the model, Spring, oops, and I have a typo there, don't I? Person. Okay. Spring will take the return data type of person and it will use that name as the name for the model. Okay. So then that should match up nicely with what we're already specifying here, which is person. Okay. So let's see if that works. So I'm restarting. Hey, there we go. And now let me show you a little trick here also. Now, we don't need to do this, but I just want to solidify your understanding of what that model object is doing for us, okay? So if I jump back into the controller again, I could do something like this just for a kind of example. I'm going to select that and extract a variable out of it. Sure, we'll call it person. And now I'm going to set maybe like 1 or 2 fields on it. Person.set first name to jokester, okay? And that's all I'm going to do. Now, can you guess what's going to happen when I restart? I'm going to restart. Look at that. The name jokester automatically shows up in this form. So does that help you to understand the relationship between the model and its attributes? By the way, each entry that we put into the model, if you think of the model again as a map, then you'll have key value pairs, okay? So this would be an entry into a map, into the model map, whose key is people, and the value would be an iterable of persons, or a collection of people, essentially. Here's another entry in the model map, whose key would be person, all lowercase, and whose value would be one instance of a person with a first name set to jokester, okay? So that's what this is doing. So I'm going to put that back now. Okay, there we go. All right, so now that we've got all of that much going, let's see what happens if we fill something out. Test Jackson, born 1/1/2000, with an email address of tjack@tester.com and a salary of $1,000. All right, so let's see what happens if I hit save. Nothing happened. So why is that? Well, I want to show you what happens now when we press this save button. So I'm actually going to make this browser window bigger. Then I'm going to open up the dev tools with a Option Command I, or I forgot what it was on Windows. I think it's a Control Shift I on Windows, I think. All right, so I'm going to click this button again. All right, and so now we get to see what's actually happening here. So it's in this little, it's in this first line here, okay? And now I can see what's in this request that is being sent from the browser to the back end, okay? So if I click on payload, I can actually see what's being sent back, okay? Now I'm seeing this in a couple of different ways. Right now I'm seeing this in a kind of a nicer way, but you can see here references to each of those fields, right? But there's no data in them. And I can also click on this source view. That might be kind of hard to see, but this is kind of more like the actual way that this data is being sent to the back end, okay? In this kind of like concatenated set of key value pairs, essentially. And in this case, there are no values there. Now, if I were to put something in here like Jake, and then save. So now I can click on this. And now you see that there's a Jake there. And if I click on the raw source view, you can see that there's first name equals Jake, ampersand, last name equals nothing, ampersand, DOB equals nothing, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so that's what's being sent to the backend. And one other thing I want you to note is the request method, okay? That is the operation, right? The get or post or whatever. In this case, it's actually using get, and that isn't necessarily what I want. In fact, it's not what I want in this case, okay? So what we really want in this particular case is to use a different request method for sending this data back to the back end, and that would be a post. Post is the most traditional way of sending form data from the browser to the back end, not a get. We can do it with a get. However, the problem that we are currently encountering, if I jump back over here, the problem we are currently encountering is that we already have a method for get, and it's this method here which doesn't do anything other than just show the people view, okay? So we can create another method to handle posts. And we can do that by simply coming over here and creating another method. And I will return a string. And we will call this, I don't know, save person perhaps. Then for now, I will just do the same thing, return people. But I will map this to a post using the post mapping annotation. So now this method should be the one that handles anytime someone tries to submit data back to the back end. Okay. Now, obviously, though, there's really no difference at the moment between the get mapping handler and the post mapping handler yet, but there's about to be in just a moment here. So what we can do is we want to get back these fields. Okay, and we want to get them back in a way that we can use them to save an instance of a person. Well, just as we created this model attribute method that can populate the fields of the person form using this object here, we can go the other way also. So down here, I can actually just put an instance of a person in this method like so. And before we get too fancy, we can just confirm that this is going to actually do something by just doing a little bit of a, print out whatever gets passed into there essentially, okay? So let's restart and let's see if this will work. And let's see, I'm also going to open up the console now. Now, sometimes I do get this little thing where I restart and I get this red error stuff. And I find that whenever I do get this, I often need to just kind of really restart the server kind of a little more harshly. And I will usually just do that by clicking on this restart button right here. So I'm going to do that now. Okay, there we go. All right, so then going back over here, let me close the DevTools and I'm going to make this smaller again because I want to see what's actually happening here. Oh, now, okay, and then there's one more thing that I have to do, which is to actually tell the form to submit via post instead of a get, okay? So we will open up the people HTML and go back to our form. And now what we can do is on this form element here, we can specify a method. And you see here we have get and post. And so now I will select post. And then I will restart. All right. And just to be safe, I will also going to erase all of that and then just reload this page just to make sure everything got loaded properly. I just want to make absolutely certain since I restarted the server a little more harshly than usual. Okay, so now let me fill this out. Sarah Smith, born 1/1/2000, S. Smith at person.com with a salary of $10,000. Okay, let's hit save and see if we get anything here. Okay, so it looks like we got an error. Field error in object person on field DOB, rejected 2001 because there was a type mismatch going into the local date. Failed to convert property value of type string to required local date for property DOB. Okay, so what's happening here is that our browser tried to send back a date in the format of, let's see, where was it at? Right here, in this format. Four-digit year and then two-digit, four-digit year hyphen month hyphen day. Okay, it tried to send it back in that format. And Spring was able to see that it should attempt to take those fields that we had named, first name, last name, all of that, and populate those values to the corresponding fields of the person class. And it looks like it figured all of that out just fine. However, the data that's coming from the browser is all text-based, right? And so remember when we were showing the date of birth and the salary and we wanted to format those for the table? So we wanted to go from a specific data type like a local date to a string. Well, now this is going in the opposite direction from a string to a data type to a more specific data type. However, when it got to the date of birth, Spring didn't know how to take a date that was in that particular format and make it work for and convert that to a local date. So can you think of what the solution would be for this? Well, if you're thinking that we just need to go back over here to our formatters, then you would be correct. So we will open up web formatter and local date formatter here. And let me make a little room. So this print method is what's currently being used to display the dates however we want them to be displayed in the browser, in the table. But this parse method here is what is used to go the other direction. And so the problem that we have here is that the text representation of the dates from the form is not in the format that we have specified for this date formatter. So we can no longer use this same date formatter for both of these methods, okay? So the easiest thing to do right now will be to just use a different date formatter for this parse method, okay? And let's see here. Actually, what we can probably do, date time formatter. If we jump into the documentation for this class, I think there's already a ready-made version of that particular incoming format, 4-digit year hyphen month and then day, and that is called ISO local date. So the IDE happens to have already populated exactly that for us. So I think if we just restart now, that part will work. So I'm going to restart. All right, so it didn't blow up. Ah, look at that. There's our person. All right, so that's the output of the system.out person line that I put in there. So we've got an ID of null, which is proper because we didn't bind a field to the ID, nor should we because we don't want that populated. The database will populate that when we save the instances of the person. And then we've got the first name, last name, date of birth is coming through properly now. And the email address and salary. So all of those fields are looking good now. So now all we need to do is jump back over to the controller. And in addition to printing that out, which is just optional, we can now save this person. And we can do that with the person repository dot save person, like so. And that should get that person added back into the database. All right, so let's go ahead and run this and let's see if this is enough, okay? We're really, really close, but let's just see if this is enough. So I'm going to restart. So now notice that that data did not get cleared out, okay? So just keep that in mind, except for the date of birth field. And I don't know if I'm going to explain real deeply right now why that is, but it has to do with the way that the browser is rendering this date field. The browser is kind of putting several things together to make this date field work. So let's populate that again, and I'll use a different date, 2002. Okay, and I'll use a different salary also. All right, let's save that. Okay, so let's see what we're seeing here. So we did get the previous Sarah Smith. I don't remember if that was already there before, but the current Sarah Smith that we just created is not there. Why is that, right? And here's the data up here, right? Yeah, so the previous one is showing up, but not the second one. Well, this has to do with the way that we are capturing this information, saving it to the database, and then returning back to the view. Okay, basically what's happening is when we return to this view in this way, we're not getting a fresh view. Sorry to use that word. We're not getting a fresh view of these model objects here, okay? That's pretty much what's happening. We're not getting a fresh view of these model objects. We can easily fix that though if we use a very common pattern when it comes to posting data to a backend and then wanting to refresh the page. And that pattern involves us doing something called a redirect, okay? So to do a redirect, we can simply put the word redirect : and then the name of the view that we want to redirect 2. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to save the person, and then it's going to cause our application to respond back to the browser, not directly with HTML that it should redisplay in the page, but instead with a command to redirect back to the /people URL. And so that's basically giving the browser and our application an opportunity to just kind of clear everything out and repopulate the model with fresh data. Okay, and that's basically what we want. We want fresh data. And this is one of the easiest ways to do this. And it's a very common pattern, in fact, when you're saving data in this way. Okay, so let's restart again. All right. And so now let's just put a brand new person in here. So I don't know, let's do person 1, Williams, with a date of 3/2003, pwill@people.com, and a salary of $3,000. And then I will just hit return. And let's see, there he is, person 1, Williams. There's all the information, $3,000. So you see that now everything is updating, and also these fields of the form got cleared out now. Okay, because with that redirect happening, we're just kind of clearing everything out and getting a fresh opportunity to requery the database for all of the latest data that's in the database and do all of those kinds of things. Okay, so let's add one more person in here. Let's see, Jerry McGuire, born, I don't know, 4/4/1964. And an email address of jmcg@movies.com with a salary of $1 million. Return. Let's see. Yep, there's Jerry Maguire, April 4th, 1964, $1 million. Okay, so that is working the way that we want it to. All right, so there are a few things that I want to clean up here, and I think we'll do that in the next lesson though. Like now that we've got the ability to create people easily right here, maybe we don't need that startup test data anymore. Maybe we can allow the form, the table to start off empty, and then it will just use the data that we can add. We didn't have a way to get any data into the application really easily before, and so that's why we were using the application runner. But now that we do have this, we don't maybe need this anymore. And then we'll also address a few things like error validation and stuff like that, okay? So that's what we'll do in the next lesson. I'll see you there. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this content and you'd like to help me out, there are several ways you could do that. First, you can always click the like and subscribe. That'll help me out a lot. Additionally, another way you can help me out is to check the link in the description below. That'll link you to my website where you can find additional courses. And finally, for those of you who might be interested in starting a new career as a professional software developer, I offer a free PDF guide that will detail exactly how you can get started in this field with no college degree and no prior experience. All you need to do is click on the link in the description below. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.